So this week's classes were sponsored by Stevie Shalom in memory of his mother, Rina Bat Rose, and also by Ezra Hedaya in memory of his wife, Bat Sophia. So all the learning is L'ilui Nishmatan. So we've been talking about electricity and the modern world and how it impacts Shabbat. And we started just with the first day we talked about the general idea of electricity. Yesterday we were speaking more about the air conditioner and the refrigerator and how that comes into play. Today we're going to talk about, for the most part, we're going to talk about the heating system and when that involves electricity and things of that nature. So before we get there, he says, avir. He says an air filter, right? An air filter or in certain types of air conditioners or things like that. So what are we talking about? We're talking about a machine that you pour water into and it makes the room cooler or what have you. So he says you can't pour the water into the machine on Shabbat, right? So that's the main piece that he wants to talk about here. If that machine needs water, even though we said a water cooler is not a problem, to change the water in the water cooler is not a problem, but for this, the use of the water would be a problem because the water becomes what we call muktzeh. It becomes set aside for a different purpose, and you can't do that on Shabbat. So therefore, to use to put water into the air filter is not allowed. Good? Yeah. Okay. I don't know. Does anyone have anything like that? I don't know. I've not really seen anything like it, but I remember in Israel they used to have some things like that. Maybe they still do.
What about a humidifier?
So a humidifier is the opposite, right? Meaning you don't put water into it; it takes water out of the air, right? So I don't. So you can't plug it in on Shabbat or turn it on Shabbat, but you can put it in. So you could put the
empty the water.
Oh, so now can I empty the water? And the answer is I would not be able to empty the water. Why would I not be able to empty the water? I believe you wouldn't be able to empty the water. I have to think about this, but I think you wouldn't be able to empty the water for the same reason, which is the water is muktzeh. It's not there from before Shabbat. I think it would be a problem to empty that water. I'm pretty certain it would be a problem to empty that water, so you would not. So if you have a humidifier, which a lot of us do, a dehumidifier. So one of the things that you would do is be sure to empty it before Shabbat so that it doesn't overflow on Shabbat. Or one of the things that we do is set the humidifier up with the hose so that it runs to a particular place so that it doesn't can continue to flow out, and you don't have to continually change the water from the dehumidifier. If you have, especially in deal, for some reason, I know if you have it in the basement, it could fill up like, I don't know, in a day, the whole thing could fill up. I don't know how that happens, but it does. Okay. Now talking about a central heating system. So he says like this: Asur liftoch b'Shabbat et habarazim shel gufei hachimum shel mitkanei hasaka shebetoch hadira, v'chen asur liftoch et habarazim shel hatzinorot hamovilin et hamayim hachamim מדוד החימום המרכזי למתקני ההסקה שבדירות, ורק על ידי גוי יש להתיר. He's talking about a situation where, like a radiator, the radiator, how does it work? There's a nozzle, like a faucet head on it, and if you open it, it'll increase the gas that flows in, which will cause more gas to heat, and it'll raise the temperature. Or if you close it, then there'll be less, right? So he says you're not allowed to touch that knob on the radiator. You can't raise or lower the amount of heat that's going to happen. Two, a heating system that involves water or something like that. Same idea. You can't be playing with the controls or the knobs to a heating system. However, if you have a non-Jew, the non-Jew can do so because this is all very indirect, and it's for the sake of being in a normal, comfortable situation on Shabbat. When we combine those two together, it's going to be okay. So now he talks about, after talking about the non-Jew, right now he's talking about what if it's a Jew, right? What if you live in a building or where there's all sorts of possibilities where this could happen. right? The superintendent is Jewish, or an apartment that's shared between two different two different apartments share the same heating, and the guy next door doesn't keep Shabbat. He's Jewish, but he doesn't keep Shabbat. He raises, lowers, or in a less wonderful situation, so you're married to someone that doesn't keep Shabbat as much as you do, right? So is there a concern that you can't benefit from someone else's violating Shabbat, right? So let's say a person, his wife doesn't keep Shabbat, right? And she says, I want it to be hotter, colder, lights on, off. Normally we say you can't benefit from the melacha that someone does on Shabbat, but when it comes to the heat, so we're going to say it's okay because the person's really doing it for themselves, not for you, and you're not really benefiting from it. But of course, if you can discourage it and you have the ability to discourage it, you should. It's only talking about a situation where you don't have the ability to discourage it. Okay, now the next thing he talks about is an electric heater that it goes on and off, up and down a couple of times over the course of Shabbat, right? Meaning, it's set to be on like a timer, right? That every hour it's on and then every other hour it's off, no problem, right? Using a timer for something like this is not a big deal. You can definitely use that, not a problem. The next thing that he talks about is if it's based on a thermostat, which we kind of talked about with the AC, and he says it's no problem. He says no problem to benefit from the heat that comes from a thermostat, even if it's on a timer or a setting, and there's all sorts of different ways that you could do this. So let me start with the older versions, right? The older versions they don't really have electric, right? There's a knob on it that you could move a little bit. He says you could actually move that when it's off, right? Meaning if it's off right now, but it's going to go on in an hour or two, right? And you want to raise it from 70 to 72 or vice versa. So he says you can do that. You can do that provided it's off. You can't do that when it's on, right? When it's on, then you're impacting the way that it works. But when it's off, it's not on now. So when you move the piece, nothing happened, you didn't do anything. You're only impacting it for later. But as we said, you have to be careful about this because you can't do it like 10 seconds before it happens because that's basically going to be the same type of thing. Anyway.
Right. Is this from air conditioner and heat where you could adjust the thermostat if it's, off?
Yeah, off. And only if it's not electric right now. The truth is a lot of the new thermostats are electric, right? And depending on how new is new, right? If it's in the last 10 years, right? So they're like battery powered, you press buttons, that's not allowed, right? And even more in the last 5 years, right, is the Nest, Google or something like that, where you have everything, it's a computer, right? On the wall, pre-programmed. So you certainly can't play with that either. So we're only talking about playing with something that is, that there's no electric involved when you're moving it. It's off and it's going to go on later, but it's not on now. And so that's what we're talking about. That's allowed. There's fewer and fewer of these items around in the world today because of all the advances in technology, which we're going to get to. We're going to get to computers and things like that.
I have a question on the Nest. You're talking about the Nest. They have it on the Nest where when you get it, it senses if you're in a room or not.
Right. So if it knows you're there or not. So I didn't get to that yet, but it's a problem because what's happening, I'll tell you why it's a problem, which you kind of obviously can see, which is you're making it happen, right? In other words, let's say you tell the Nest the light should go on when I walk in the room, or the heat should go, when I'm in the room, the heat should be on 72. When I'm not in the room, the heat should be on 68. When I'm sleeping, it should be on 68. When I'm waking up, it should be on 70. Meaning it reads my physical presence, not on a timer, right? So if it reads my physical presence, then my presence is at least indirectly causing something to happen. And I think we would say that it's definitively causing it to happen because the computer is pretty accurate. And it's not like, oh, it might work. It works. Otherwise, you wouldn't have it.
But you're not telling it. It's a smart. It knows more than you know. That's
right. Well, you could compare it, which we're going to get to, which you can compare it to the electric eye on the door, right? Which is basically when I walk up to the door, right? When it senses that I'm there, open the door, right? So in general, we say about those doors that we should not use them, and of course, those are not fun when you have to. I don't know. I always think of Florida when I think of electric eye doors. In Florida, all the buildings have those electric eye doors. How do you walk in? So unless you're going to allow that, which I'm not going to say that you're allowed to do, what ends up happening is you have to make arrangements, right? The arrangements are that the building guy knows you're coming, so he walks in before you, so that he opened the door, not you, which, you could talk about whether or not that's allowed, or you could, what I to do, and I have to admit, I'm not in Florida.
Can't hear you, Rabbi.
He froze.
He froze, Joe, right?
Yeah.
Nathan, I think you'll give the class now.
Yeah. What are you doing, IG? Where are you?
I'm in the car. I'm on my way to the city.
You're in Deal or you're in Brooklyn?
I'm headed now to Deal this afternoon. We're going to go. How you guys doing? I miss you all. Joe, Romano.
We miss
Nathan,
everybody.
I miss you guys.
Me too.
Who else is there? Ezra?
Hi, sorry, my internet went down. I don't know what happened.
Rabbi,
Rabbi.
on the Nest, there's a feature, because I disconnected it, where you could remove the efficiency if it senses you're in the room or not, and just set it to the degrees you want, no matter if someone's there or not. There's a way to remove it from that.
Right.
And you could put it on the schedule too.
Right.
Instead of you using, So again, what I'll say is I don't know when I got cut off. So I'm just gonna hold on. Yeah. Okay. Good. I don't know when I got cut off.
Rewind it back.
What's that?
Go back. Go back to where you're frozen.
Yeah. Well, I don't know where that was. But basically, I'll say, look, it's a lot like an electric eye door, which is an electric eye door is a problem. Now, I'm gonna get to the electric eye door in another day.
The light. The light that sensor you that when you're coming in the room.
Yeah.
Same concept.
But, the other case which we're going to get to, which is very common, not only the electric eye door, is a lot of us have this on the outside of our homes. We have a light that goes on when you sense someone's there. It's for security or something like that. So we're going to get to that as well. Another issue, well, whatever, I don't want to get into this now, is the camera, right? The camera is also something that happens. A lot of us have on the front of our house, we have these, when you walk up, all of a sudden the camera turns on or does something different. So all of these are problems we're going to get to. But basically, on a basic level, we prefer not to have these problems, right? So if you have a situation where, as IG mentions, you could disable it, right? Like we said about the refrigerator, you could turn the light off, you could put a magnet or something like that. That's going to be the recommendation. The recommendation is don't have electronics responding to what you do. That's the basic recommendation. Now, we're going to make a number of exceptions to those rules, including, like I was saying before, there's situations where you don't have a choice, right? let's say, I didn't want to get into this case now, right? But I'll give you you don't have a choice, right? You're in Florida, right, where you live in an apartment building, a condo, or something like that, and you had dinner by somebody else, and now it's 11 o'clock at night, and you're walking up to your building, and no one else is walking up to the building, right? At 10 in the morning, at 8:30 in the morning, you want to go to shul. People are walking in and out. It's no problem to wait for somebody. But at 11 o'clock at night, right, you could be waiting an hour, right? You can't, and what, so you're not going to get into your building. So we'll talk about that in terms of how we deal with the electric eye door. There's a number of things that have come about in the last, I'll say, 20 years that pertain to electricity that are they're hard to get away from. The things that come to mind are security cameras, huge, right? It's hard to avoid being in a security camera. The electric eye door at a hotel, right? Anyone that stays in a hotel over Shabbat, you need to get into your room. How do you get into your room without, are you locked in the room? Because they're all using these electromagnetic doors. So that's a big challenge. We talked about with the Nest, where the way that, right now, the way that the many of the thermostats are set to work is based on, how you walk in, or not, or something like that. It will not be long. It will not be long before you do not have a lock on your front door, right? Your house will recognize you and say, welcome, come on in, and so on. So the pace at which electricity is around us and has become an essential part of what we have makes things a lot more challenging, especially since the way that the halakha has come about this is, electricity kind of burst on the scene in the last 150 years. In the beginning, the rabbis were not so sure, how do we deal with this? But basically what they said was, number one, basically most rabbis said, hey, if we let electricity be okay, people are going to be turning on lights on and off, and there's going to be no Shabbat. And I think they were wise to make that decision. And so they said that electricity, we're going to consider it just like lighting a fire. So once they said that, electricity in general became off limits, which, if it was about turning your lights on and off, okay, you could have it set from beforehand. And then when it became about your refrigerator, okay, you have a magnet, you tape the switch, and so on and so forth. The heater, you have a timer, very nice. But as things have progressed more and more technologically, it's become much harder to get away from this. And there's many situations where you almost can't get away from it. And we're going to talk about a couple of those, but I'm not up to that yet. So hold off on those types of things. And in the meantime, if it's possible, we're going to recommend what we said about the refrigerator, which is we should avoid it. We should avoid having a situation where we are more or less directly causing the computer to make a change in something. So that's what we're going to start with. Okay. Okay. Now, we talked about timers. Very good. So another case that you can't do, right? And this is today when you walk into a public bathroom, most of the time, the way that you dry your hands is no longer with towels, right? But rather with these electric machines, right? So let's say my hands are completely dry, right? Sorry, let's say my hands are completely wet, right? I washed my hands and now I want to dry my hands, right? So what am I going to do? I'm going to take them and put them, let's start with the radiator. I'm going to put them near the radiator. I can't do that, right? Why? Because when I put them near the radiator, what I'm basically doing is I'm probably going to be boiling the water on my hands, or getting the water on my hands to a very high temperature, which I can't do. So you can't do that. You can't put your hands that are wet, on or very close to the radiator. However, you can if you go like this, right? Meaning you've already gotten most of the moisture off, and now it's just residual moisture, that's not a problem because that's not significant, and it's not a problem to do that. So in other words, if you've gotten if your hands are wet and you know, kind of rub off most of the water, and then you want to just warm your hands by the radiator, you can do that. But you can't just straight out of the sink put your hands by the radiator. The machines that sense when you're there, you can't do that, right? You can't take your hands under a machine that's off, put it underneath it, and it turns on. That you cannot do. If the machine is on anyway, or it's potential that the machine goes on every 2 minutes or something like that, which is basically the same idea. If you wash your hands off, if you rub your hands off first, then you put the hands underneath, it would be okay. Okay, so that's the electric hand washing machine. He talks about one or two other things which I'll include. So he talks about an electric blanket, which he allows. Right, if you have a blanket that either plugs into the wall or is battery powered. Generally, those blankets don't have switches that you turn up and down, and generally we don't anyway. So if you use an electric blanket or pillow, these are allowed. I haven't seen any of these recently, but you know, today the way that the blankets tend to work is they're chemicals, so they kind of, there's no buttons, there's no turning or anything like that, and those are okay as well. So so an electric blanket, electric pillow, not a problem. Anyway, that's where we're going to stop for today. Tomorrow, we're going to get into a lot more complicated stuff, the type of things that we've been talking about, the TV, the cameras, the telephone, the answering machine, the VCR. It starts getting more complicated. So looking forward to some of the back and forth on that.
Thank you, Rabbi. Hazak Baruch.
Take care.
Have a good day, everybody.